Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. In today's video, we're going to talk about the injury to Jimmie Ward. We're going to focus on some of the possible replacements for Jimmie Ward for the Week 1 game that he's likely to miss, could miss even more. We're going to talk about candidates in-house that we already have on the roster, and then we'll talk about a couple of players who could be brought in as free agents. Let's not waste any time, guys. We're going to jump right in. So it was reported yesterday by Kyle Shanahan. He did say that Jimmie Ward suffered a pretty significant hamstring injury, and that's definitely not good. I'm no medical professional, but from what I hear about hamstring injuries is that they're really tricky in terms of the recovery process. You might think you're okay, then you go and run a little bit, and then you're like, nope, not okay. So one of the things too that we're really going to be looking at is when will Jimmie Ward be back? So they said that Shanahan said that he's likely to miss Week 1. To me, I actually wouldn't be surprised if he also misses Week 2, simply just for precautionary reasons. Now, if last season taught us anything, is that this football season, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. You know, you can't really put all your eggs in one basket when you start the season. So ultimately, I think they'll play it a little bit safe with Jimmie Ward, have him start the big game Week 3 at the Denver Broncos as his debut in the season. So now, we have Weeks 1, possibly Week 2, that we'll need to find a replacement. So when we look in-house, I want to talk about 3 different guys. So the first player that we're going to talk about is free agent George Odum that we brought in the offseason, one of the first days of free agency. You know, he is a special teams ace. He was an all-pro on special teams a couple years ago. I think that was the primary reason why we brought him in, but we also brought him in for safety depth. And unfortunately, that depth is being tested a little bit early, but he is someone who started games for the Colts, you know, when he was with them, started games last year, had an interception. You know, he's been, you know, with the team the entire offseason, so I'd like to think that at this point, being the veteran that he is, that he'll be very familiar with the scheme, the communications, things of that nature. So I'd feel relatively comfortable with a guy like George Odum starting. I think to me right now, he is also the favorite to start Week 1 at safety. Now, coming up after George Odum is going to be Tarvarius Moore. So he's someone who's actually been with the team for a number of years. I think it's about maybe 4+ years now. So very familiar with what we do, with what we ask of our safeties in this scheme. You know, he is incredibly athletic. And let's not remember, he did have an interception in the Super Bowl. So someone that clearly the coaching staff has, you know, a lot of trust in being able to play, especially in big moments. So with Tarvarius Moore, though, is the big thing is he's coming back from his injury. And that preseason game against Green Bay, he did get beat real bad by Romeo Doubs from the Packers. So, you know, chalk it up, it was maybe just one bad play, but ultimately you'd like to see Tarvarius Moore play a lot more in preseason Week 2, Week 3, and look a lot more comfortable out there for you to trust him to be out there as the starting free safety come Week 1 at Chicago. Those two are the two most likely guys that will probably have start at free safety. It'll really come down to those two. Now, the third guy in-house is going to be undrafted free agent Tayler Hawkins. So he went to San Diego State. I think he's just the least likely just because of a lack of experience. You know, it's one of those things where we've started undrafted, you know, free agents many times in the Kyle Shanahan era, but I think with something like this, especially at a position like free safety, we'll probably lean more towards veterans. Ultimately, I think a guy like Tayler Hawkins is probably destined for the practice squad, as is the other undrafted free agent safety, Leon O'Neal Jr., who quickly became a fan favorite. Overall, though, I think ultimately what the Niners will do is remain in-house with who they want to replace Jimmie Ward, simply because it looks like he'll only miss a game or two. We really don't want to take up or waste a roster spot on a free agent who will only be here for 1 week or 2 weeks, and then we just cut him, and then Jimmie Ward comes back. So, but here's the thing. I do want to talk about a couple of external guys because it is a possibility. You never know what we'll do, especially because, you know, in the coming weeks, you know, we still have to have guys out there who can practice. So let's talk about the 2 external free agents that we could potentially bring in to replace Jimmie Ward. The first guy that I want to talk about as a possible free agent to bring in is going to be someone that we'll be relatively familiar with, and that is Tavon Wilson. The reason why we're familiar with him is he played with the 49ers last year. Now, he's a 10-year veteran, has the ideal size that we look for at the safety position, and again, appeared in 8 games for us last year, started 1 game. Now, the 1 game he started was that dreadful home game where Colt McCoy just completely carved up our defense. Yeah. But either way, we can't really chalk that down to being the fault of Tavon Wilson. But here's the thing. He's a veteran guy, familiar with our scheme. So if we do want to go the route of bringing in a free agent guy, I think he's probably the most likely candidate that we would look for initially. Now, the big reason why I want to say that I don't think we'll bring in an external guy, even someone who's familiar with the scheme like a Tavon Wilson, is simply because, yeah, they're going to take up a roster spot. Now, anytime I've tried to do a 49ers 53-man roster, there are some really, really difficult decisions to make as you get down towards the end of the roster. I don't think that the 49ers would really choose to, bring in a guy like a Tavon Wilson and maybe have him take over a spot instead of a, promising young player like let's just say like a Tariq Castro Fields or someone to that effect. I think ultimately what the Niners would rather do is, keep that potential, the younger guys. Otherwise, if we were to cut them and hopefully get them on the practice squad, wouldn't be surprised if another team picks them up. Seattle, I'm looking at you, so I know you love our players. But other than that, so we have Tavon Wilson, who's an option for us to bring in. The other guy I want to talk about is going to be Tashawn Gibson. Now, he's someone like Tavon Wilson, 10-year veteran, so been around the league for a long time. Played a number of years in Jacksonville under Gus Bradley, who doesn't run the same scheme, but it's pretty similar. So I think it would be relatively easy for Gipson if he were to come in to adjust and be very familiar with what we're trying to do on defense. Now, the one thing which I do like about Gipson is that he's definitely a playmaker. So even just the last 3 years, if you combine it, 7 interceptions, that's a whole lot more than any of our safeties have been getting in recent years. So you do have to like that. Ultimately, though, I think it's pretty unlikely that we would bring in a guy like Gipson unless we suffered another injury at safety, and I'm knocking on wood that doesn't happen. But I think it's one of those things that if we were to go this route, we'd probably lean more towards the guy that we're familiar with in Tavon Wilson. But even more likely than all of that, I think we'll just remain in-house. We'll probably have Odum or Moore start at free safety week 1, possibly week 2 as well. Let Jimmie Ward recover, and then we bring him back, and that allows us to maintain that extra roster spot where we could, keep one of our promising young players. Ultimately, guys, I'm going to leave it right there for this video. Do leave your thoughts on the injury to Jimmie Ward. Who do you think is the favorite to replace him as the starter for however many games that he will be missing? And yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please, guys, do like and subscribe to the channel if you like what I do. It really means a lot. Really trying to push that subscriber count up throughout the season as well. And yeah, at this point, guys, I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'm going to catch y'all on the flip side.